So I'm going to talk about components and more templateless components, and talking about how it's a good layer to do more DOM stuff and kind of expose a nice findable API, or integrate a jQuery plugin, or do something like with SVG. And gonna go into all of those. This is using the Ember app kit. I have a really simple model that has red, green, and blue. So this component, let's first just kind of look at the template that I have set up here. I have 3 inputs bound to red, green, and blue, and also displaying the output of those, so you can see those are bound. So now I'm going to hook it up to the color rect component. So this component is not doing any custom rendering. All it's doing is view bindings. So the attribute binding binds it to style. Style depends on color, width, and height, and formats a style attribute. Color formats color, so RGB value. Not mean to launch that. So now we have a.
So that color square doesn't have a template?
Nope. It's just relying on the views. The view is going to render a div. The div's going to have a style. And then, so all the binding is relying on the attribute binding to bind the style. The rest is computed. Width is fixed, but I could go in here and copy a slider, say like 100, 200. Probably need to add this to my model. So that's just no template, just kind of leveraging the style binding. Let's look at doing SVG. We have the same sort of beginning, except my tag name is SVG, and now I put the width and height as attribute bindings. I could have put these as attribute bindings, but I didn't really want them to be bound. So then on render, I'm going to output a path. This is something I did in Illustrator, the path part. Then fill gets the color. And then I have an observer for color to change. That gets the path and updates the fill. So this has all the same, it has the same interface as the color rec. So now I can say color squash. output that.
Your Illustrator skills are great.
It's a paint.
Oh.
It's a dab.
Paint dab. Yes, thank you.
That's awesome.
So this is
Very nice.
our Ember view. The height, width, and height we get from the attribute binding. And then our fill is something that we're added an observer and are updating ourselves. Now let's look at a jQuery plugin. This example might be a little complicated, but I'm trying my best to. So I've added, I found a jQuery plugin. I've added it here. I installed it. Now I have a basic view that is going to have values as its input. It's going to output a list. It should be escaping value, but this is just a simple demo. On did insert element, it's going to apply the plugin. On will destroy, it's going to get rid of the plugin. And then it hooks up an item dragged. Ignore these for now. And just, actually, what it does on drag is only important when I actually want it to update the underlying array. So, but mainly just focus on the, need to add an array to sort.
And a kiwi.
So let's see. I'll just keep adding to this template. Cool. So now it's my draggable list. So everybody understands the renderer is rendering the string to insert into the DOM. Then it's applying the jQuery plugin when it actually gets inserted to the DOM, destroying it. This callback is just for setting up on the update event provided by the plugin. Then we're getting the underlying array and removing it using the observable methods, so that if we had a drop. Updates. And so the last thing, so that's a consequence of these guys. If we didn't do anything here, the plugin would still render, but the backing array wouldn't be, so each binding's not updating. So that's what does this part. Now to make it a little more complete, in Ember we have array observers. So array observer just gets two events, one when the array will change, and then array did change, and the indices and amounts that have changed, amounts that were removed, amounts that were added. We can use these to update our list items. So the array will change, we get rid of our plugin, we update, we remove the list items, and then on did change, we add new list items for the values that were added and reapply our plugin. These two actually watch values itself, so if the values property changes, it will remove the array observer from the previous and then add it. And the last thing is this has on init, so it adds the initial array observer. Now doing this allows us to what's another fruit?
Orange.
Pineapple.
Oh, I want one to remove. Well,
Oh.
this will take our array. Still stay updating. So that was the demo. So I just want to show that they're a great place to integrate with other JavaScript libraries that update the DOM. They're a good place to do custom DOM stuff and stuff like if you want to render something to a canvas or use D3 for a graph or a pie chart, wrapping in a component is a great way to encapsulate that and reuse that. That's it.
That's great.
Questions?
Quick question, can you talk a little bit about the way, so like in the default it's a div and it has an ID. I think by default it's ID and then some Ember GUID, right? How do you access that? What's the best way to, the ID of the element as it's been thrown to the DOM? If you have to sort of manipulate internal to the component something with the ID, you want to know about it and deal with it?
So
Does that
a
make
couple
sense?
of things. Let's see, let's go to one of those actually. So one, this dollar sign on a view returns a jQuery object that wraps the view's element as it was inserted.
Okay.
This .element ID is the element ID of the view.
Is there any caveats on mutating that or changing that?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't mutate it after the view has been inserted into the DOM.
Okay.
So it has to be set. It's also a plain property. You can't make it key.
Okay.
It's not observable.
It seems like there's a lot of patterns, carousels, things, other languages that have, it's dependent on some dynamic IDs in it that it's going to sort of loop over a process. And it seems like how you handle that. I don't know, I can't think of a really good example from it.
So the one thing about components that I was trying to demo is the sort of screen space. Everything below the component that I manually rendered is whatever I put in, right? And I'm in charge of it. I'm in charge of keeping it up to date. I'm in charge of putting it. And Ember is not. Ember is just at the tag of my component, but not below it, unless you use a template. But in a component, you can even, a template is a function that just renders the context, and it doesn't have to be an Ember template too. So there's a lot of options in the view for I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, that's making some sense. Yeah.
Just think of everything below the component's tag as being your space, and above it as Ember space, and that you define a set of properties that are going to be your inputs, and you want to keep your component reflective.
Let's say you have a component and that its behavior is an effect of pulsating, or it's over time it's changing the bounds of the element itself, which would cause the whole view to get pushed up and down, or whatever text around it, whatever wrapped around it outside in the DOM. Is that done? Is that sort of where the run loop comes into play, where it's sort of done at? Does that make sense? The sort of cycle of, like a hover event that sort of throws a pop-up, and it's going to have some effect to its neighbors, because the page is going to have to flow to that. And if you have something that's very, for lack of a better term, chatty, or its space is not fixed, and it's dealing with the stuff, and you want to manage that. My question's not very clear, but it's sort of the visual behavior is it's not playing well with things around it in the DOM. How do you not take this offline? It's a complex question. It's just sort of how do you deal with it?
You're worried about, there's other tools in Ember for dealing with, so if you want to make sure, if your component's observing 4 things, and you want to make sure that it only updates the DOM once, you would use the run loop. You would schedule once in the render queue your work to update the DOM from all of your observers, so that you ensured that if 4 of your input values changed, you're only going to update the DOM once.
Right. You're kind of,
yeah, right now, in this one, this color did change. If I set red, green, and blue and one click event, it would actually update this attribute 3 times, unless I wrapped it in an Ember which would prioritize it in the so it has the binding. that would prevent, it would make it only do the update. When you do that too, though, you have to check that this still returns a value, because if it schedules a render and then somebody destroys this view, you have to double check that it's actually still there when you defer it. But this is a good idea. For this particular component, probably wouldn't make much of a performance difference, but if you were doing something that was invalidating the layout, yes, it would be a concern. Any other questions?
Alright, I'll ask kind of a random one since we're at this code. Like, you guys have plans for doing a request animation frame with, I don't know, outlets and stuff? So like,
request
I mean,
animation
there's
frame.
plans around animation, I'm not sure specifically.
So like when you run your stuff to the DOM at 60 frames per second, I know it sounds dumb, but I've had a lot of beer, figured to ask.
So
You
that,
don't know what, so kind of,
I can just, I mean, I just did a little like mini game that made use of request animation frame.
okay.
It's nothing that really specifically ties into that kind of component-y stuff. And it doesn't really.
Tie to the revenue at all or no?
Well,
The bottom.
it does if you want it to. Basically, I mean, you want like kind of raw callbacks from things that are native, like your request animation frame. You want that to kind of initiate a run loop and have all like the code that's going to be scheduling all these kind of deferred events to take place within that run loop.
I was curious just in general about that topic, so yeah, that's cool. That's
I
pretty
can
good.
show you a thing that uses it. So.
So yeah, basically, so there's kind of a couple of approaches. One, you on your input events, like mouse movements or clicks, like if you're doing a game, those are your input events. And you might run a run loop on those to update state, but then just use request animation frame to reflect that state in the DOM.
Okay.
And there you wouldn't be putting a run loop, but that would be more component based, because you're saying I'm going to update the DOM, not Ember. Ember is just gonna
Okay.
handle my input and update
Oh, that makes
state.
sense. Okay.
If you do have Ember handle your DOM, you would want to run loop on request animation frame, because if you don't start a run loop and you do something that requires deferring, it uses set timeout 0 to flush the deferred actions, which would kind of negate the purpose of using request animation frame. But
It wasn't completely Bo's question. And they're giving out free food and beer at Facebook, and like their number one thing with React is request animation frame. I'm like, I don't know if they're gonna ask.
What did they say about React and request animation frame?
That's like why we made it, and that in SEO, but I don't know.
That seems weird.
But yeah, well, anyway,
okay.
it's one of the things they were bumping. So
Are you gonna put this on JS Bin, or are you afraid we're gonna reverse engineer your Adobe Illustrator?
I'll put it up.
Yeah, because only after reverse engineering will you find
You
out
have to
there's
remind
Adobe
me, though,
Illustrator
I'm too
skills
bad
suck.
at remembering to stick anything up after I give a talk.
I'll remind you.
Okay,
All right.
good.
I think that's pretty much it.